What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Ukraine's ticking time bomb.
I try to imagine if this was my home and I just lost everything, trying to rebuild, but I got to get these explosives, out of my area so I can safely do it. And that's the kind of care you put into this work right here, is because what if this was your home? Then what?
Retired US Army Green Beret Ryan Hendrickson on his YouTube channel Tip of the Spear Landmine Removal, filming this week in Ukraine. Harriet, Ukraine hardly an underreported story generally. What about it are we missing?
I think that the slightly less reported aspect of the war in Ukraine is just how much damage that has been done that will last for a long time after the war in Ukraine. So we're talking about how it's thought to be one of the most heavily mined countries in the entire world. So even before Russia invaded, it had planted mines all over Ukrainian territory, especially in the south, in Crimea and in parts of the east as well. But in the last 3 years since Russia invaded, more than 2 million mines are thought to have been scattered all over Ukraine, and about a quarter of its landmass is thought to be contaminated with landmines and unexploded bits of mortar shells, that kind of thing. And that's about the size of England. So there's this extraordinary, huge challenge of how to start clearing these mines to be able to reuse some of this territory, even while Russia is still continuing to booby trap areas with landmines.
Yeah. So whatever discussion is happening now about any potential resolution to this war, whoever's living on this land, frankly, whether they be Ukrainian or Russian, they're in danger.
Yeah, so it's thought that there are about 6 million people living on or near contaminated areas. But this also affects people far beyond the borders of Ukraine, because this is also Ukraine being one of the foremost food producers of the entire world, producing wheat and corn and sunflower oil in particular. All of the land that is either potentially contaminated or actually contaminated can't be used. And also when Russian troops retreat, for example, Ukrainian troops cannot retake that territory until the landmines, that they know that it's safe with, it's been checked for contamination. So yeah, 6 million people directly affected, and more than 1,000 people have been injured and 360 killed by landmines since the start of the war, including 18 children. But this is a problem that is going to be the world's problem, just like every other war zone that is still contaminated by landmines decades after wars have ended is the world's problem.
Yeah, and a lot of people listening will be thinking about this, Felicity, I'm sure, those images of Princess Diana in the 90s. I thought this was kind of resolved. People weren't using mines, certainly not on this scale anymore.
Well, that's certainly how it was looking, because in 1997, when the Ottawa Treaty was signed by many nations, but notably not Russia and not the US and not China, I don't think. But it very much at that time was the sentiment was that mines are just morally unacceptable. They go beyond the battlefield. They're indiscriminate. They affect ordinary people, children. They lie there for decades after the war has ended. And there was such this repugnance towards them that all these nations just decided to sign this treaty. And you're right, it was Princess Diana and Tony Blair, and it was a big a big movement to get rid of them. And what's really sad is that all of that is now unraveling and it's being undone because the countries that share a border with Russia, so Poland, Finland, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, have announced that they are withdrawing from the Ottawa Convention. And Ukraine has also announced that it plans to follow their lead because they have decided that they have to fight fire with fire. And because Russia was never party to this convention, to this treaty, the only way that they can think about defending themselves properly is the idea of a new Iron Curtain, which is to stuff their border with this aggressive country with millions of landmines to try and stop them an invasion. And there is speculation that whether Russia gets what it wants out of Ukraine or it doesn't, that it could turn its attention to another country along its border. And so they are seeing these mines as a deterrent.
Yeah. And Jamie, it's worth saying, isn't it, these mines sort of aren't your granddad's mines, right? There are the sort of, land mines, similar to what you might have seen, I suppose, in World War II. But now they jump, they're dropped by drone, they're in the sea. These are technologically different.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the reason that, Harriet was saying that people are so fearful of them. It's a huge amount of explosive and firepower that basically stops people from using any of that land because they don't want to go near. It's not like just that you can step on one bit of area. Sometimes it's, the area that's covered by the mine is sometimes huge. You don't know what else might trigger it further around so it kind of instills a lot of fear. It's indicative kind of the way it feels like the world is going a bit, that all of these people are pulling out of the Ottawa Treaty, all of these countries. Zelensky himself has basically, said there is no other substitute in terms of defense purposes for anti-personnel mines, and particularly when the Kremlin has the largest stockpile of anti-personnel mines in the world. He's saying it's basically the only way to level the battlefield, but, anti-landmine campaigners really do see this as a kind of larger trend, that we've talked about actually on this podcast of international rules-based order, international humanitarian norms being eroded as more and more countries go, well, actually, we can't really sign up or subscribe to these rules anymore because the world has changed.
And incidentally, Harriet, the news story of the week, the reason we're talking about this now, is to do with how they can diffuse these mines, isn't it? It's not completely hopeless.
It isn't. So this week, the Ukrainian State Emergency Service said that it would start using the robotic dogs that they have been using on the battlefield to help clear the landmines. So these little remote-controlled little robot dogs, which are actually supplied by a British company, they're kind of like a walking version of the aerial drones. So they're remote controlled. And the idea is to reduce the risk to Ukrainian sappers and mine diffusers, because you can sort of approach the mines remotely with the little camera. But unlike traditional bomb diffusing robots, they can also sort of jump and climb upstairs and go through the thick grass, which makes them a bit more appropriate for the type of land and the type of cities that they're working in. But what's interesting, I think, about this story is that most of the landmine clearing is still done by people, and in particular women. Because before 2022, only men were allowed to work in explosive disposal in Ukraine. And like we were saying, there were a lot of landmines in Ukraine before the war. And what's so tragic is that so many mines were cleared so painstakingly, only to just be like the country's become littered with them again. But now, because of all the men being subject to the draft, a lot of the mine clearing is now done by women, often in really high heat and wearing like really heavy gear. You're on your hands and knees, just painstakingly going through the grass bit by bit by bit, looking for tripwires. And there are a lot of different demining groups in Ukraine. There's lots of different methods that they're using. They're also using real dogs. They're also using like sniffer dogs to sniff out TNT. But generally speaking, it's even with like AI algorithms to help and drone footage and satellite footage to help, it's such painstaking, slow, human and really, really risky work.
Is there any way, do you think, Felicity, of putting the genie back in the bottle? Or do you think it is a case of, because of the technological advancements, both in planting and then demining these things, they're not, going to slow down? They're not going to go back to the level we achieved?
I think it's very hard to put the genie back in the bottle, really. Like, it is, as Harriet was saying, just the painstaking work of removing them. But I do think what is changing a little bit is the technological innovations that are being introduced to try and clear the mines. So using high resolution satellite imagery, thermal drone cameras and artificial intelligence to accelerate analysis of where they are. Which is helping to some extent. I mean, it's worth saying that it's so costly trying to clear these mines. I saw a prediction that it's like £31 billion to rid Ukraine of its mines, and massively reliant on other countries and private companies to help out. But as Harriet was saying, it does still sort of require that painstaking human effort of removing them. So there might be other ways that can help in clearing them, but it's still going to take such a long time. Even if this war ends, even if there is a war in sight, it's going to take ages to clear them, really.
And Jamie, what's the military logic of using them at all, really, given that they are indiscriminate, given that Russia actually wants this land? I mean, it's not just putting it in places where, are not contested. It's putting landmines in places where they want Russians to go and live.
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of... They're often called the perfect soldier in that they don't sleep, they don't eat, they don't distinguish between individuals. I kind of see it from a perspective of the disruption that they cause is huge. You know, we were discussing earlier about the fact that they're in the sea. You know, Ukraine have said that they've accused Russia of dropping them into the Black Sea and other areas to kind of disrupt international shipping. It does seem slightly short-sighted, but I guess they're at this point in the war, from Russia's perspective, there's an element of like, well, we want to cause as much disruption and damage as possible to kind of bounce them into peace talks. Just to think about, you know, the future. We did obviously sign the Ottawa Treaty. We have obviously had the use of landmines in the past, you know, the Second World War and the Cold War. It looks like we're moving back towards a stage that is quite depressing. But, you know, we all understand, and I think as you were referencing the Diana stuff, that the visual, you know, the use of it in Cambodia, in Bosnia, in Afghanistan, you know, the visual outside of that is really powerful of the children that are being lost to this. I think that, you know, in the future where there is a peace, that could be one of the ways in which, you know, we put pressure again on Russia or any country that's using it to avoid doing so.
Yeah, I mean, it's grim to imagine, but there's a potential, isn't there, Harriet, you know, considering what Jamie was just saying about the Black Sea, that one of these sea mines could find itself over on a pleasure cruise in, you know, Bulgaria or Romania or Turkey, and that would be a major international incident.
I mean, I'm not sure about how credible that would be technologically speaking, but it is true that many people believe that the Black Sea is now littered with naval mines. And as we were saying, even as technology advances with new methods of clearing mines, so too does technology advance with new methods of dropping them. Like, most of the Russian mines are no longer planted by armies, they're planted by drones. But I think that the broader picture here is that landmine use and casualties are growing all over the world, like not just in Ukraine. So there was the Landmine Monitor last year, which was published in November, reported a nearly 22% increase in deaths or injuries by mines since 2022. Most of those were civilians, and nearly 40% of those were children, because a lot of landmines are detonated by children. They're less vigilant, they tend to run around more. A lot of landmines are very cynically and cruelly hidden inside toys. Like, that was particularly notable in Afghanistan. And even as there are these great global efforts to clear mines, you know, from Angola, Cambodia, Colombia in particular, landmine use has significantly increased in Myanmar in particular, you know, since the military took power in 2021. And Syria is also one of the most mined places in the world. Casualties are also increasing in Yemen, even as violence has decreased since the 2021 truce. So I think that what we maybe should focus on a little more is the kind of broader picture beyond Ukraine, that even while we resolve conflicts, the rise in armed conflicts we're not keeping pace with the rate at which conflict is increasing. And what's so sad about the Ottawa Treaty, which was this landmark agreement to ban anti-personnel mines, is that it led to a 95% reduction in landmine casualties in just 15 years. It was such a success. But while so many countries were busy destroying their stockpile, others were busy, like Russia, massively increasing it. So we're just not keeping pace with the level of violence and the rate of increase of danger that is the reality of the world.
Yeah, and from a British perspective, Felicity, finally, I guess, I mean, you know, we do see sort of unexploded bombs from World War II occasionally crop up and things like that, don't we? But basically, these landmines, if this new Iron Curtain comes about that we've described, are getting closer to where we are, just geographically.
That's true. I mean, I think the earlier point that we made about it affecting, I mean, yes, they are closer, but also the fact that Ukraine is such an agricultural powerhouse and is such a huge exporter of grain and oil, as we mentioned, I think that is something that could keep it on the international agenda in a kind of cynical way. I mean, obviously we should care about this because people are dying and getting maimed and wounded and cause all sorts of damage. But the other thing is that we really rely on Ukraine for quite a lot of its food exports, and so much of the land. I mean, even land where there aren't mines, it's just not. People just don't know. There's that uncertainty, so farmers just can't farm anymore. So I think that is an interesting side of this story, because I'm hoping that that's what keeps it on the international agenda, is that it will affect the rising costs of food for so many of us, because all of this land just can't be farmed anymore.